I still remember that night vividly. Even now, years later, whenever I walk past a narrow back street or hear kids playing hide and seek after dark, a chill runs down my spine. It was early October. The leaves had just begun turning golden and red, and the air carried that crisp, cool scent that only autumn brings. My two younger brothers and my older sister had gone with me to visit my mother at her small apartment on the edge of town. Our parents had separated a few years earlier, so these visits were rare and always felt special. Mom lived in an older part of the city where the buildings were close together and the streets felt strangely quiet even though many families lived there. Her apartment was on the second floor, right beside a long, dimly lit alley that served as a shortcut into the complex. It was the kind of place parents usually warned their kids to avoid after sunset, but we were excited. We loved Mom's cozy little home with its soft couches, colorful cushions, and the warm smell of her cooking. A few visits earlier, we had become friends with the kids living downstairs, a boy named Ryan and his younger sister, Lily. Ryan and I would play in the parking area almost every time we came. We played tag, cops and robbers, and sometimes just kicked a ball around. But that particular evening, with Halloween approaching, Ryan suggested something different. "Let's play hide and seek outside tonight," he said with a grin, "when it's really dark." My siblings immediately agreed. We planned to sneak out around 9 p.m. after Mom thought we were all settled in our rooms. The night came quickly, as it does in October. The tall streetlights cast an orange glow over the parking lot, but the shadows between the buildings were deep and thick. We gathered outside, giggling nervously. There were 6 of us: me, my sister Emma, my brothers Lucas and Noah, Ryan, and Lily. We played the usual bubblegum in a dish rhyme to choose who would be it. Ryan ended up as the seeker. Everyone scattered. I grabbed Emma's hand, she was the oldest, and I always felt safer with her, and we ran toward the back of the building. We slipped into the long, dimly lit alley, heading toward the big trash bins at the far end. It seemed like the perfect hiding spot. No one would think to look all the way back there. We crouched behind the large metal bins, hearts pounding with excitement. At first, the game felt thrilling, but as the minutes passed and everything grew quiet except for the distant sound of wind in the trees, the fun began to fade. The alley felt colder and darker than I remembered. Emma whispered, "They'll find us soon, just wait." But after a while, even she sounded unsure. We decided to give up and head back. As we stepped out from behind the bins into the middle of the alley, my stomach dropped. At the far end of the alley, right under the faint light, stood a tall figure. It wasn't one of our friends. This person was unusually tall, as if wearing platform shoes or stilts. Their face was hidden in shadow, but I could clearly see wild, colorful hair, like a bright, messy wig. The clothes looked baggy and patched, just like a circus performer. It was a clown. But why would someone be dressed as a clown in an alley this early in October? The figure stood completely still, staring straight at us, not moving, not speaking, just watching us. Emma grabbed my arm tightly and pulled me backward. "We need to go back to the others," she whispered urgently. We hurried down the alley, trying not to run too loudly. Luckily, we soon found Lucas and Lily hiding near the edge of the parking lot. We told them what we saw, our voices shaking. They didn't believe us at first, but when we pointed back towards the alley, the clown was still there, only now closer. It slowly raised one hand and waved at us, a slow, deliberate motion. Under the light, we could see its face better. It wasn't normal clown makeup. The face was painted completely black, making the eyes stand out unnaturally bright and wide. It looked wrong. Terrifying. Suddenly, Lily screamed, "There's another one!" We spun around. A second figure stood behind us, taller, with greenish hair and unnaturally long limbs, also dressed like a clown. Both of them were watching us silently. We didn't wait. We ran. Lily dashed to her apartment, and the rest of us sprinted upstairs to Mom's place. Inside, we found Noah already there, talking excitedly to Mom. He had his own story. While hiding in the small courtyard of the complex, he heard footsteps. Thinking it was Ryan, he stayed hidden behind some bushes, but when he peeked out, he saw a clown staring down at him from just a few feet away. He and Ryan had run back together. Mom hugged us all tightly. She believed us right away and kept us inside for the rest of the night. For a while, we thought that was the end of it, but later, around 2 a.m., I woke up feeling thirsty. I quietly went to the kitchen for a glass of water. That's when I heard a faint tapping sound coming from the living room window. Curious, and honestly still half asleep, I walked over and lifted the corner of the blind. My blood ran cold. The same clown from the alley was right there, outside the second-floor window, staring directly into my eyes. Its black painted face pressed close to the glass. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I screamed and ran to Mom's room. By the time she came out, the figure was gone, but she didn't doubt me. She stayed up with us until morning, checking the locks again and again. We never found out who those people were or how one of them reached a second-floor window. Maybe they climbed, maybe there was a fire escape we didn't notice, but that night changed something in me. Even today, I avoid dark alleys and never play hide and seek after sunset. Autumn evenings still bring back that heavy feeling of being watched by something that didn't belong in our world. The second story takes place in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the Midwest during a chilly October many years ago. I was just 11 years old, a shy sixth grader who walked the same route home from school every single day. Our school building sat directly across the street from an old, run-down house that always gave me the creeps. The paint was peeling off in large flakes, the front yard was overgrown with weeds and dead leaves, and the windows looked cloudy and neglected. It seemed like no one cared for the place, yet every now and then I would catch a faint movement behind the curtains, as if someone was watching the world go by. Most kids in my class thought the house was funny. They would laugh and make jokes about ghosts or witches living inside. I never joined in. I always told them it wasn't right to mock someone's home, even if it looked terrible. Deep down, though, I was terrified of it. I hurried past it as quickly as possible, keeping my eyes on the sidewalk. My friends teased me for being such a scaredy cat, but I didn't care. Something about that house felt wrong, like it was hiding secrets that children like me weren't meant to know. Everything stayed normal until mid-October, when after-school programs started. My usual group of friends stayed late for sports and clubs, leaving me to walk home alone for the first time in months. The days were growing shorter, and by the time school let out, the afternoon light already had that soft, golden autumn glow that made shadows stretch longer than usual. On my first solo walk, I passed the old house like always, but this time something was different. As I glanced toward the second-floor window, I saw a figure standing completely still, staring straight at me. I couldn't make out any details, just a dark silhouette against the dim glass. My heart jumped, but I kept walking, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe the owner was simply curious about the kids walking by. Still, the feeling of those unseen eyes stayed with me all the way home. The next few days repeated the same pattern. Every afternoon, around the same time, that same shadowy figure would be waiting at the window, watching me pass. I never saw the face clearly enough to tell if it was a man or a woman. It didn't matter. The silent staring made my skin crawl. I told my friends about it during lunch one day, but they just laughed and said the person was probably trying to pull an early Halloween prank on the scaredy kid. I tried to believe them. I scolded myself for being too imaginative. Then, about a week before Halloween, the situation escalated. I was walking home alone again, backpack heavy on my shoulders, when I noticed the figure wasn't at the window this time. Instead, a tall silhouette stood motionless on the front porch, facing the street. My steps slowed. I wanted to turn around or cross to the other side, but I forced myself to keep going. I didn't want to show fear. As I drew level with the house, the figure suddenly bolted down the porch steps and started running straight towards me. I screamed and broke into a full sprint, my sneakers slapping against the cold pavement. The person chased after me, shouting strange, garbled words that made no sense at all, almost like they were speaking in some twisted, angry language. The voice was deep and rough, definitely a man's. He was fast. I could hear his footsteps getting closer. Panic flooded my body. I knew I couldn't outrun him on the open street. Up ahead, I spotted a narrow alley between two houses. I darted into it and squeezed behind a large, foul-smelling dumpster. I crouched low, trying to control my breathing, praying he wouldn't find me. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Moments later, I heard his heavy footsteps enter the alley. He slowed down, muttering to himself as he walked closer to my hiding spot. I could hear his ragged breathing. He was right there, maybe only a few feet away. I closed my eyes and waited for the worst. Then, suddenly, the footsteps turned and ran back out of the alley. I stayed hidden for what felt like forever, too scared to move. When I finally peeked out and saw the alley was empty, I ran the rest of the way home without stopping. The moment I burst through the front door, I told my parents everything, tears streaming down my face. Dad called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. I described the man, the house, and exactly what happened. They listened carefully, took notes, and promised to check it out. The next day, they returned with surprising news. The run-down house had been vacant for years. No one lived there. The utilities were shut off, and the property was listed for sale but had sat empty for a long time. The police believed it was probably a squatter or a homeless person using the place as shelter. They said they would increase patrols in the area, but nothing more came of it. I never walked past that house alone again. My parents arranged for me to stay late at school or get rides home. My friends were shocked when I told them the house was abandoned. Even they stopped joking about it after that. To this day, whenever I see an old, neglected building with overgrown yards and dark windows, that same childhood fear returns. I'm 22 now, but the memory of that chase, those nonsensical shouts, and the feeling of being hunted in broad daylight remains crystal clear. Autumn walks home will never feel innocent again. The third incident happened in a small rural town surrounded by thick woods and cornfields during one of the coldest Octobers I can remember. I was 17 at the time, working part-time at a local apple orchard and pumpkin farm called Harvest Hollow. It was a popular spot for families during fall weekends. People came to pick apples, carve pumpkins, drink hot cider, and take photos among the colorful leaves. The owner, Mr. Harlan, always made the place feel magical with strings of orange lights, scarecrows, and a big hay maze. Usually, I worked the evening shift on Fridays, helping customers load pumpkins into their cars and closing up the cash register. Most nights it was peaceful. The air smelled of fallen leaves, cinnamon, and wood smoke from the bonfire near the entrance. But one particular Friday, things felt different from the moment I arrived. The sky was overcast and gray, and a heavy fog had settled over the fields by sunset. Even the usual cheerful chatter of visitors seemed quieter, almost muffled. Around 8 p.m., after most families had left, Mr. Harlan asked me to do one final check of the pumpkin patch before locking the gate. "Make sure no one left any tools or stray kids behind," he joked. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the dirt path between rows of pumpkins. The large orange gourds glowed faintly under the distant lights, their shadows stretching long and twisted across the ground. I had gone about halfway through the patch when I heard rustling behind me. I turned quickly, shining the light. Nothing, just pumpkins and dry vines. I continued walking, but the feeling of being followed grew stronger. Then I saw it. A dark shape moving slowly between the rows, about 30 feet away. At first I thought it was another worker, but the figure was too tall and moved in an unnatural, jerky way, almost like it was floating slightly above the ground. I called out, "Hello, we're closing up." No answer. The shape stopped moving. I took a few steps closer, my boots crunching on dry leaves. That's when I realized it wasn't a person at all. It looked like one of the decorative scarecrows from the entrance, but it had moved from its post. The old flannel shirt and straw hat were the same, yet the way it stood felt alive. Its head was tilted at an odd angle, as if watching me. My heart started racing. Scarecrows don't move. I laughed nervously, thinking maybe a friend was playing a prank. "Okay, very funny, come on out." Still no response. I turned to walk back toward the barn, but now another scarecrow stood blocking the path ahead, one that definitely wasn't there minutes earlier. This one had a different hat and a torn burlap face with stitched eyes that seemed to follow me. Panic set in. I broke into a run, cutting across the pumpkin rows toward the side fence. Vines tangled around my ankles, and I nearly tripped over large pumpkins. Behind me, I could hear heavy footsteps and the sound of straw rustling. I didn't dare look back. When I reached the wooden fence, I climbed over it as fast as I could, scraping my hands on the rough wood. I landed on the other side near the corn maze and kept running. Inside the tall corn stalks, everything became a blur of green and shadow. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I knew the maze well, but fear made me lose my sense of direction. I turned left, then right, breathing hard. That's when I heard whispering, soft voices repeating my name over and over. "Daniel, Daniel." It came from multiple directions at once. I stopped dead in my tracks. No one else was supposed to be out here. I pressed myself against the corn wall and tried to stay silent. The whispering grew louder, closer. Then I saw movement at the end of the row, several tall figures all dressed as scarecrows walking slowly through the maze, their arms swinging stiffly, heads turning unnaturally. One of them raised a hand and pointed directly toward where I was hiding. I ran again, bursting out of the maze near the back of the property where an old tractor shed stood. The door was unlocked. I slipped inside and hid behind some hay bales, covering my mouth to quiet my breathing. Minutes passed. I heard footsteps outside the shed, slow and deliberate. One of the figures stopped right at the doorway. Through a crack in the wood, I could see its burlap face inches from the opening. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, then finally turned and walked away. I stayed hidden until I heard Mr. Harlan calling my name from the main barn, sounding worried. When I finally emerged, shaking and covered in dust, I told him everything. He looked pale. He admitted that strange things had happened before. Tools moving on their own, scarecrows found in different positions in the morning. He always blamed kids or animals, but tonight he believed me. We locked everything, and he drove me home himself. The next morning, Mr. Harlan called to say all the scarecrows were back in their original spots, but one had fresh mud on its boots and what looked like blood on its sleeve. He decided to remove them all after that. I quit the job 2 weeks later. Even now, years afterwards, I can't walk past a pumpkin patch or corn maze in autumn without feeling watched. The whispering still echoes in my nightmares sometimes, especially when the leaves start to fall and the fog rolls in. That October taught me that some decorations aren't just for show, and some things pretending to be scarecrows are far more terrifying than any ghost story. The fourth story comes from a quiet college town nestled between rolling hills and dense maple forests in New England. It was late October during my freshman year when the entire campus turned into a postcard of fiery red and orange leaves. I had joined a small hiking club that organized weekend trails through the nearby woods. The leader, a senior named Marcus, promised the autumn colors would be breathtaking. I was excited. I had grown up in the city and never experienced a proper fall forest before. We set out on a Saturday afternoon for what was supposed to be an easy 3-mile loop called Whispering Ridge Trail. The group had 8 people: me, Marcus, 2 other freshmen, and a few locals who knew the area well. The air was crisp, carrying the sweet scent of decaying leaves and pine. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, making the forest floor glow. Everyone was laughing and taking photos, stepping on crunchy leaves that sounded like breaking glass. About an hour in, we reached a scenic overlook where the trail widened. Marcus suggested we split up for a bit. Some could rest, others could explore short side paths for better views. I chose to walk a narrow trail that branched left, marked with a small wooden sign that read Fallen Oak Grove, 0.4 miles. It seemed safe enough. The path sloped gently downward into a grove of ancient oak trees whose leaves had already turned deep burgundy. The deeper I walked, the quieter the forest became. Birds stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to die down. I reached a small clearing where a massive fallen oak lay across the ground, its trunk covered in bright green moss. I sat on it to rest and pulled out my water bottle. That's when I noticed the leaves around me were arranged in strange patterns, perfect circles and spirals, as if someone had carefully placed them. I thought maybe other hikers had done it for fun. I stood up to take a picture when I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see one of my group members. Instead, I saw a woman standing between two trees. She wore an old-fashioned long coat and a wool scarf, her dark hair falling over her face. She looked like she belonged in another era. I smiled awkwardly and said, "Hi, are you part of another hiking group?" She didn't answer. She just tilted her head slowly, staring at me through strands of hair. Her eyes seemed too dark, almost completely black. I felt a sudden chill despite my warm jacket. I started backing away toward the main trail. As I moved, she stepped forward, matching my pace exactly. Her feet made almost no sound on the leaves. I turned and walked faster. When I glanced back, she was still there, now closer. Panic began to rise. I broke into a jog, following the path markers. But after a few minutes, I realized I had taken a wrong turn. The trail looked unfamiliar. The trees were thicker, and the light was fading faster than it should have. I pulled out my phone. No signal. That's when I heard whispering. Multiple voices, soft and overlapping, coming from all around me. They sounded like children laughing and then suddenly crying. I spun in circles, trying to find the source. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of movement, several figures in old coats, all with long dark hair standing perfectly still among the oaks. I ran. Branches scratched my arms and face as I pushed through the undergrowth. My backpack caught on a limb and I had to yank it free, nearly falling. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder and faster. I could hear dry leaves being crushed in rhythm with my own panicked steps. I kept repeating to myself, "This isn't real, just find the main trail." Finally, I burst into a small clearing I recognized, the one with the fallen oak, but now there were more figures, at least 7 or 8 of them, standing in a wide circle around the tree trunk. They all faced inward, heads slightly bowed. The woman I first saw stood at the center, holding something in her hands. It looked like a small bundle of leaves shaped like a doll. I tried to slip past them quietly, but a twig snapped under my foot. Every head turned toward me at once. Their movements were too synchronized, too smooth. I screamed and sprinted straight through a gap between 2 figures. As I passed, one of them reached out and grabbed my sleeve. The touch was ice cold, like fingers made of frozen bark. I tore free and kept running. Somehow, I found the main trail again. I could hear Marcus shouting my name in the distance. When I reached the group, I was gasping, covered in scratches and dirt. I told them everything in a shaking voice. Most of them looked skeptical, but Marcus went pale. He quietly admitted that the trail had a local legend. Years ago, a family got lost in these woods during a bad autumn storm. They were never found. Some hikers claim to see the lost ones, silent figures who appeared when the leaves were at their peak. We cut the hike short and hurried back to campus before sunset. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark eyes and heard the whispering. The next morning, I noticed 3 perfect leaf circles arranged on the doormat outside my dorm room. I swept them away immediately. I never went back to that trail. Even now, when I visit New England in the fall and see those beautiful red maple leaves, a part of me wonders if the forest is still watching. Some paths are better left unexplored, especially when the woods start whispering your name. The final story took place in a sleepy coastal town in the Pacific Northwest, where autumn brings heavy rain, thick fog, and early darkness. I was 24 years old and had just moved into a small rental cottage near the edge of the forest and the rocky beach. The house was charming: wooden floors, a big stone fireplace, and large windows overlooking the misty woods. The landlord told me the previous tenant had left suddenly in late September, but I didn't think much of it. I was excited to experience my first real Pacific Northwest fall with its constant drizzle and colorful changing leaves. Every evening after work, I would sit on the back porch with a cup of hot tea, watching the fog roll in from the ocean and wrap around the ancient cedar and fir trees. The air always smelled of salt, wet earth, and pine. It felt peaceful at first, but after about 2 weeks, strange things began happening. It started with small sounds. At night, I would hear soft footsteps on the wooden porch, as if someone was walking back and forth just outside my bedroom window. When I turned on the porch light, no one was there, just wet footprints that disappeared by morning. I told myself it was raccoons or deer. Then the whispering started. I would wake up around 3 a.m. hearing faint voices calling my name, "Sarah, Sarah," coming from the direction of the forest. The voice sounded like a woman, gentle but sad. One rainy Thursday evening in mid-October, I came home late from work. The power was out because of the storm, so I lit candles and built a fire in the fireplace. I tried to read a book, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I kept glancing at the large living room window. Outside, the fog was so thick I could barely see the trees. That's when I noticed a pale face pressed against the glass. It was a woman. Her skin looked almost gray, long, wet hair clinging to her cheeks. She stared straight at me with wide, unblinking eyes. I screamed and dropped my book. When I looked again, she was gone. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it outside. Nothing, only the rain and fog. I called my best friend that night and told her everything. She suggested I was stressed from the move and offered to come stay the weekend. I felt better after talking to her, but the next night, things got worse. I woke up to the sound of my front door creaking open. I had locked it, I was sure of it. Heart pounding, I grabbed my phone and quietly walked into the living room. The door was wide open, cold wind and rain blowing inside. On the wooden floor, wet footprints led from the doorway straight toward my bedroom. They stopped right at the foot of my bed. The prints were small, like a woman's bare feet. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, fireplace roaring. Around 4 a.m., I heard the whispering again, much closer this time. It came from inside the house. "Come outside. It's cold out here alone." At first light, I drove into town and went straight to the local library. The old librarian knew everything about the town's history. When I described the woman with wet hair and gray skin, her face changed. She pulled out an old newspaper article from 1998. A young woman named Emily had disappeared during a heavy October storm. She had been walking home from the beach trail near my cottage. Her body was never found. Locals called her the Fog Walker. Some hikers and residents claimed to see her near the forest edge during rainy autumn nights, still searching for the path home. The librarian warned me that people who saw her often felt compelled to follow her into the woods. A few had gone missing over the years. That evening, my friend arrived. I told her the whole story and showed her the article. She was skeptical, but agreed to stay inside with the doors locked. Around midnight, while we were watching a movie, the power went out again. Then came 3 loud knocks on the back door. We froze. The knocks repeated, slow, patient. My friend whispered, "Don't open it." I crept to the kitchen window and peeked through the curtain. The woman stood on the porch, soaked, staring directly at me. She slowly raised one hand and waved, as if inviting me to come out. Her eyes looked hollow and endlessly sad. Behind her, in the fog, I could see other faint shapes moving, more figures standing among the trees, all watching the house. We stayed up until sunrise. In the morning, we found long strands of wet black hair caught on the back door handle. My friend helped me pack my things immediately. I moved out that same day and never returned to the cottage. Even now, years later, whenever I visit coastal towns in October and the fog rolls in thick from the sea, I feel uneasy. I still sometimes hear faint whispering at night when the rain taps against the windows. I never answer. Some spirits don't want to be found. They only want company in the cold, endless autumn rain.